Welcome to the sixth installment of the PolyCast side series Evergreen. I'm Wouter, Locutus Snijders. The series' sixth season comprised of 29 episodes, 2 specials, and was the second to be recorded while live streamed. As with the previous Evergreens, PolyCast regular co-host Daniel Q Quick selected and ranked the 10 topics he feels most retain their relevance years after they were first published. Similarly, recurring guest co-host Canis Albinus re-listened to the entire season to select 10 most representative moments of the show. The countdown will begin after I say now. Number 10, from episode 155. Thriving, not just surviving, is a recurring mantra for turn-based strategy gaming.
Of all places, article on CNN discussing the rebirth of turn-based strategy games, and they bring up things like XCOM, which is coming out again, the Civilization series, and others. Let's start out with, Civ, since that's where we're at. Well, we just have Gods and Kings, fifth Civ series game, and an expansion. Seems to be somewhat popular, except for grouchy old men like me, who's not quite happy about all of the developments. But yeah, there seems to be a certain revival, I would agree. I'm not sure if it's developing quite in the direction that I think the niche customer base really wants.
That's what Paradox games are for?
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, Paradox are technically not turn-based, but definitely have all the complexity and all things that hardcore crew is after. But I feel that Civilization 5 has gone in a direction that, well, at least with the first vanilla, I haven't played Gods and Kings, so I shouldn't say too much, but it made the game in a way simpler and less interesting. Fewer decisions, longer waits, less to do per turn. And I've seen a lot of interviews with Sid Meier in which he talks about game design. He's discussed Civilization Revolutions for the console, all these modifications they made to make the gamers and customers happy. But one of the things he says is that the gamers and the customers might not exactly know what they really want. For example, they would reload the game every time they lost a battle.
Oh, maybe he doesn't understand his own customer base. He is getting kind of old.
Yeah, I think that might be the case. If you look at his most recent project, this Facebook Civilization, that's flop. It's completely misunderstood what people loved about his original games and what kind of people loved the original games. That's my theory.
I think it's as much the marketing teams. They don't give the money up to the niche games anymore. You gotta get mass market or you don't get the game made at all. Mm-hmm. So they end up with all sorts of compromises that it grows the franchise, more people buy it, but it's not Civ 2, Alpha Centauri.
Yes, it's losing the original customer base.
Yeah.
And that is a great tragedy because, I mean, what are we going to play then?
Give it another year with Kickstarter coming up. We're going to see those titles get funded by the people who want to fund them. We won't have to be at the mercy of the big name publishers saying, this is a AAA franchise. You got to get Civ into 8 million hands.
That's just based on cost. AAA game means that they've spent 20 to 50 million, depending on how much they're willing to fund it, on the development of that game. At 50 million, if they've actually spent that much for some AAAs, like first-person shooters tend to, they actually do need to sell a lot of games to catch up. $60
just to break
each.
Even.
Yeah, at $60 each, that's more than 1 million copies sold just to break even, and that's not even covering most of the costs because you're still spending money on top of the development. So yes, AAA games require a mass volume of purchases. Now, does that mean that somebody like 2K should be running a strategy game company like Firaxis? I would say no. But that's because 2K doesn't really understand the concept when their boss keeps talking about first-person shooters and consoles.
And how strategy games are not contemporary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With things like Civilization Revolution, I look at Civilization World, the Facebook Civ game, like Civilization Revolution in the context of it is meant to appeal to a different segment of the gaming market. Mm-hmm. And then the question then becomes, how much time, energy, effort do you spend during initial development and then subsequent development to not only respond to those people who are interested in playing it, that kind of feedback, but then also what about your traditional market base, which would be players like us and the traditional and still present AAA title, which has a considerable overhead cost in terms of time and money, as opposed to not a Civilization Revolution, but like a Civilization World.
Yep.
I think the big issue with Civ World that they've seen that we haven't seen in, say, Civilization 5 is subsequent support and updates. And I don't just mean the whole downloadable content argument, downloadable content versus an expansion. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, strictly speaking, patchwork. I know Civ World, there hasn't been an update or a word in more than half a year. Nothing has changed there. And there's still criticisms coming about and nothing is changing. And I think it's the execution of a Civilization World that's fallen short, whereas even in Civilization Revolution, there were consistent updates after the game first came out, a year and a half afterwards. And we're still seeing that with Civilization 5. Almost 2 years after the game was released. So that's for Civ specifically, but more generally from CNN. When I say the rebirth of turn-based strategy games, I know it can be an antonym, but I actually prefer the term resurgence, and it kind of gets to those games that don't have to be AAA. You don't have to try to get that AAA funding. Mm-hmm. You use a Kickstarter. You can use microtransactions, or something that's more niche that you can start small, and then if that works, and then based on player feedback, you want to expand that experience, then you can get that money for that. You've already got that audience established. So therefore, the overhead that you're paying in the hopes that I got to sell 1 million copies to break even, you don't have that big of an issue. And actually, I think the more difficult thing, especially with turn-based strategy games where you get a lot of the niche, is if you want to cover turn-based strategy games or just strategy games, period, it's a matter of volume now. There are so many more choices just in a short amount of time, whereas strategy AAA titles, you look at them and it's, well, we can talk about them, but we're going to talk about the usual suspects. There's so much more now. There's so much to be able to cater to specific market types, like a Civilization Revolution, like a Civilization World, and then back to your traditional, including those that still like the single-player experience, mostly, if not exclusively.
Well, I mean, that's part of what I think the article is trying to talk about, is things are changing a little bit now. The 90s were all about the Nintendo boss talking about if you can play the game with a blue dot, then it's a worthy game to make. Where basically graphics are excess. And then you rolled into the 2000s where graphics was taking over because, well, they could. And then you started getting to the point where games were major on the graphics and light on the content. Content, I mean strategy and other things like that. So there was a bit of a pain there. But for this resurgence for Dan, or the coming out of strategy, it has been 20-ish years since original real strategy games had come out. So it's not that surprising that they're coming up again, at least in the way things roll. And as you kind of alluded to, content and gameplay are starting to take over from graphics because it doesn't cost as much to get the cool graphics anymore. So gameplay is becoming more important because people are looking around going, yeah, it's pretty, but who cares?
We've reached this plateau thing. They cannot get much better with the graphics. I mean, they can add more shiny and sparkly to it, but they're at kind of a bit of a ceiling. So now they have to catch the gameplay up to get people's attention.
And just to give more of an example to what Dan was talking about with Kickstarter and that, Endless Space, it's one of the games that I've been playing on my Twitch account, entirely Kickstarter funded, or at least crowdsourced funding, whereas if you pre-ordered, you got a pre-access and were able to vote on everything about the game. And it's a turn-based space strategy game. So in particular, harkens back to the 90s original Master of Orion style, skipping that Mu 3 debacle. That's coming up. There's, Paradox is kicking out a ton of games. But I think one of the things you have to watch out for now in this environment is what's being called strategy game is being thrown out there. I do not consider tower defense games as strategy as compared to everything else that actually is considered a strategy game. Yes, there's strategy within it. There's strategy within almost every game, but that doesn't make them strategy. Not as the genre. First-person shooters have strategy. That doesn't make them strategy games.
Agreed.
The niches are getting bigger. It's not just strategy is the niche. It is, you have RTS, you have TBS. This happened a long time ago, but it's the volume, as Dan was talking about, is getting better, even though there is quite a bit of boring stuff.
Zippy's Guitar says in the chat, Plants vs. Zombies isn't a strategy game. I would say that no, that is not a strategy game.
Is too.
It is not. It's a tower defense game.
Tactics.
Yeah.
Tactics.
But I have strategies.
Every game has a strategy. Life has a strategy, but it's not a game or a strategy game.
A bunch of corncob captains that those work.
Yes, let's talk about the strategy of camping in first-person shooters.
Yeah.
What I find interesting about the article is they don't mention that XCOM was slated to be a first-person shooter until everyone jumped up in arms and Firaxis.
Yeah, that's actually something that would have made this article a newsworthy article rather than just a blog post by some random person. It would have been newsworthy had they said, the reason it's resurging is because 2K tried to make a stupid first-person shooter out of a strategy game and people said, stop that. They didn't cancel it, but it still hasn't come out yet.
Yeah. It's on the back burner.
Also to the resurgence, especially when we talk about strategy games not being contemporary or even just general comments about are strategy games dead? I think the question was, how come strategy games aren't visible anymore? Well, I think that they're doing a little bit better in being visible now, and back to a lot of those greater choices from smaller developers with smaller overheads because they're also not trying to be the next Civ. They're not trying to be the next XCOM, the next Master of Orion. So we're being more visible now. We're being more vocal, and I think the industry's just kind of like, oh, you guys weren't dead. You were just really, really quiet.
Could be.
We're just over here taking a nap.
Yeah, well, the first-person shooters were talking over top of you all of the time. I think that's what...
Pretty much.
Yeah, and now that Activision has a first-person shooter releasing every month, people are starting to get tired of it and starting to look for something better.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, but actually I think it's part of a general trend in gaming that back in the olden days, the 90s, like when UFO came out, when Civ 1 and Civ 2 came out, people would play these games forever because they didn't have that many, right?
No, there wasn't that many releases a year.
No, and people couldn't afford them either, because mostly kids bought them at that time. It's those kids who are now in their 30s and older who have lots of disposable income, waste them all on computer games or spend them on. But I'm seeing a trend with myself and friends and everything that we play games for shorter amounts of time now, even if we enjoy them. We play them for, I don't know, at most a few months, 2 months, and then time to move on. We're tired of it. It's great game and all that.
DLC will come out like with Fallout New Vegas. They had that want to go back and play through all over again. Yeah, but it's not like it used to be when you played the same game for, I don't know, months, a year. A year, yeah. I mean, how many years did I play Civ 2? I don't want to think about it. I learned 4 languages at that time at least.
No, that's the thing.
But just one more turn, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's just the point about some of the replayability factors.
John, when you talked about the olden days of the 90s, I got a little lightheaded.
Number 9, from episode 143. Downloadable content done right with Civ 5. What to make of DLC for games, not just Civ and yours.
Mike Dina writes about on Game Ranks about how Civ 5 DLC is done right. He basically explains Firaxis has basically provided DLCs to improve gameplay and to give a more immersive experience to be able to buy a better game, if you would say that, if you would be willing to say something like that, go so far as that. And whether or not I agree, I think I agree that the DLCs are amazing because while some of them are overpowered, such as Babylon, I think is extremely overpowered. And while there's still some balance changes to be done, I think DLC is an excellent way to make Civ 5. Maybe Civ 5 is one of the last Civ 5s ever created, and then they just create DLCs and expansion packs from there. I'm sure there's going to be a Civ 6, of course, but I'm saying that before then, you'll have the ability there'll be more of a seamless transition. It won't be here's an expansion pack, wait a year and a half, 2 years, or longer, and maybe get another Civ. You'll be able to get different things and different ideas from the lead designers at Firaxis and things like that. Like if Ed Beach thinks that, okay, well, I want to make a DLC that does this, he can do it now, and I think it's great, and it's also cost effective. While I think they're a little expensive, $50 for a few DLCs is expensive. I think given the option of purchasing them like that is excellent.
Yeah, definitely having them available, and also DLCs can really spark your interest back into the game as well if you're having a bit of a game drought. I think that it's a good idea, and sometimes it can be something that you're really interested in. Like maybe someone was interested, really particularly interested in Babylon as a civilization with a science advantage, and that got them back into playing the game.
If you pick a certain Civ, you got to make sure you build your strategy around, what's your strength, like what's going to be your peaking moment in the game.
Yeah, definitely. And with Babylon, you don't want to let them sink their roots in, because then they become a problem.
I do pose a question though. What would you do at writing with Babylon? This is kind of getting off topic a little bit, but the DLC. What would you guys do with the great scientists for Babylon when you get it at writing? Would you plan an academy? Would you save it for technology because you have to pay upkeep on that scientists? Or what would you guys do? I found that academies probably work the best, but I'm not sure yet. I haven't really worked it out.
Yeah, I think it's worthwhile going for the academy. Sometimes you might be at war at that particular moment and you want a technological advantage, and then you could just if you don't have gunpowder, you could just immediately have gunpowder, and then upgrade your troops and then give yourself the upper hand. So it can work really well the other way. But if you're earlier on, you want to really build up your science, then academy would be the best option, I personally think.
Okay. Do I think that DLC should be in patches? I think a lot of people have said that, you shouldn't have to pay for these things, but, it takes programmers time and effort to make these things. Nothing comes in this world for free. People give up their, time and be able to produce these, great games at Firaxis, for us. And I think I'm not trying to shortchange when I say it's expensive. I'm just saying that, that they do a good job. I think DLCs are excellent, really good way to add gameplay and different experiences and just really improve the game.
Yeah, I mean, it's always nice to get stuff for free, but they have put a lot of work into it. So yeah, it's quite reasonable for them to ask for money, especially if it's a big deal, something that really improves the game. Then asking for money, of course,
Exactly.
How much would you pay for a DLC that you really liked?
I'll be honest with you. When it came out 50% off, I bought all of them. I paid $25. I bought every single DLC, or $26. I bought every single DLC, and I really enjoy them. Even though they're overpowered as heck, I only play public games with them. I say public games because I play sometimes publics, meaning for example, when you start playing in an organized league or any type of situation where organized friends or whatever situation you want to go into, you'll find that you'll become better than an average public player. You'll win 90 to 100% of your games. Literally. And, it's really a lot of fun. But, when you play even an overpowered Civ on top of that, it gets to be out of control. That's why I try not to play it, but it's a lot of fun. You go, Spain Inca or Spain Babylon, and you get 1,500 gold, and you get the science thing. It's almost impossible to beat, but it's a lot of fun, and, it's all good times. And, but yeah, I think that honestly, for a reasonable price for a DLC, I don't know what the factors are. And I'm a finance guy, or at least I got a degree in finance. And then, basically, you have to, time value of their time and how much, money or how much time they're putting into the game, how much programming efforts, how much they pay their programmers, how much they do that. So, if they're allotting it for, it costs them $5 and they want to make a 20% profit margin, then, they have to make it a certain price. Now, whether or not I think that, it should be $2.50 or $5, I think honestly, $50 of DLCs there's 7 DLCs isn't that much. Overall scheme of things in life, but it's just the principle of it is that, if I pay $50 for a game, I don't expect to pay, more than $50 less than $50 for the DLCs or something like that when it only adds just a Civ. So I think that maybe it's a little bit overpriced for the DLCs. Maybe if like they all came out and made maybe a package deal instead, if you bought all of them, you get like a 30% off or something like that. We're going in semantics here, but I think
incidentally, you don't price in firm theory. You don't price based on a desired profit margin. You price based on what would maximize your long-term profits, or short-term if that's what your goal is. But generally, you would price to maximize long-term. And so there's a certain number, and it does take some experience to find it, where you'll sell X times Y amount and get you the most value. And that's what they're going to be looking to price it at. And that that number, you really can't set a profit return on that. You have to go with that number. And then it just becomes a matter of estimating, okay, or am I going to be able to get an acceptable profit margin on this next product? And then if you feel like you can, then you do roll out another DLC or another product or whatever. So they're going to price it to get what they can. That's how businesses operate.
Profit margin is important because they have to figure out the expected value, what their return is going to be, because they say the net present value of saying like, okay, well, or future value saying like, okay, well, I can invest in, T-bills and just have cash like Microsoft does, or whatever they invest in. I don't know what they invest in, but let's say Microsoft has a lot of cash, or Apple has a lot of cash. They have to say, do I want to invest in this DLC, or do I want to invest in something else? And I have to get a certain required return, other than the fact that maybe saying that my branding of saying like, okay, well, I'm going to build this DLC just because I really think that my fan base would like it. I mean, maybe we take not a loss, but maybe we break even or just meet our costs for now.
Definitely incentive to choose popular ideas.
You definitely want to look at opportunity costs when you're deciding what you're going to invest in. But I'm just saying, you don't price based on that. You price to get the maximum returns for the product, and then whether or not you do it is based on whether or not you estimate that it's your best investment or not.
True.
Now, people are wrong. It happens, but whatever.
Yeah, because you only have a certain lifespan of the game that you're going to be investing in. So it's not going to be like forever that you get this return on investment. It's going to be a certain limited amount of time until either another game comes out, or maybe you just continue with this game. But I doubt it. It's probably going to be a Civ 6 out, hopefully.
Yeah, and that's why you see prices drop eventually.
Yeah, they definitely dropped. I mean, I saw that Civ 5 was like $7.50. I almost bought a few copies just for friends to play with a couple weeks ago. So I mean, it's not, the price isn't really an issue. I mean, and we're dealing with just the price of whether or not, it's just the principle of the matter of how much money you want to spend on something. And honestly, the price point for each person is different. I mean, it's a tough economy right now. But we're just getting better. So I'm pretty excited about that too.
Number 8 from episode 156. Should so-called honor in multiplayer matchups be rewarded? Looks at the typically half-empty glass as half full.
So Phil probably has a few things to say on this topic. He probably doesn't even have to read the thread. Just the title alone is enough.
Well, the title is what puts the troll face on my face. Okay, this thread is started by John129Pats, and the thread title says, "Should honor be rewarded in next game's multiplayer?" And the first thing that came to mind is the honor social policy, and I'm like, well, it is rewarded. I mean, it might not be the best thing ever, but you get great generals to boost your military. You get a great general. You can take discipline. You get more experience. What do you mean it's not rewarded? And it might not be as good as Liberty in a lot of cases or tradition, but it's there.
That was my first thought too.
He means it in the traditional sense of honor. Like when he first started playing. He had a lot of his workers stolen by his opponents, who would then delete the workers immediately so he couldn't get them back and things like that. Which takes me on a bit of a side story. My first true player versus player multiplayer Civ 4 game ever, I played against my roommate at the time, and I killed him on like turn 7 with my starting warrior. That was he thought it was better than me too. That was very fun. Anyway, and also he's had this John129Pats has had situations where like he made a gold for a die trade and then got declared on 2 turns later. I could have sworn that only worked on the AI, but apparently you can get some people. So there's that as well. See, I think I even made this comment in a post for once that like no one would fall for this. But
You got beat.
Or no, someone was telling me that nobody would fall for this, that no human would accept such a deal. See,
Yeah.
I knew better. That's right. The point of the thread is he basically wants there to be some reward for behaving honorably in multiplayer, or I guess more penalty for not behaving honorably. I don't know. Like, it's going to be difficult to put that into a game and multiplayer without completely changing how the game plays. I think, to be honest, would just be you get some sort of huge and, well, not huge, but some reasonably strong for continued honest relations with somebody. So, like, say you've been trading gold for resources for like 100 turns. Well, now you both get more than either would have gotten if you just kept on your resources in total. So there's some incentive for cooperation in that regard. And you still have incentive to backstab and kill each other as well, as part of the normal course of the game. But something that actually tells you, okay, I want to behave honestly with at least a few civs and have good relations with them, because that gets us both ahead, and it leaves other people out of the loop. You know, basic free-for-all types of strategy here. And that's one way you could implicate that. There's no way, like, I don't care if my civ auto-declares on somebody across the world because he backstabbed his friend. I'm not going over there unless it's helping me. You know, you are a person. It's up to you to decide whether or not dealing with somebody is good or bad. I don't think you need to hold people's hands too much here. I would like to see a little bit of incentive just to have, like, dynamic diplomatic relations where you get bonuses for working with each other, but that's about where you can really draw the line in multiplayer. Other than that, it's up to the players.
Yeah, I think this is crap.
But it's equally, it's a thing is that when you play multiplayer, that you have to in some way be trustworthy. Like, if you you play it often, you know the people that you can trust. You know the people that you can't. You know equally that everybody's going to try and win the game and backstab you at some stage. But there are people that basically you can't trust because they will never agree, you know, that they will never, you know, pull through an agreement or whatever. So you don't trust them. It's like, in a way, there is inherent reward for being a trustworthy person, given the fact that you are still trying to win the game, and at some stage you will take the steps that you have to take to win the game.
Yeah, I think the real solution here is to just have a regular group of guys you play with. The same way, you know, when you play a tabletop game with your pals, I know that if I make a deal with my friend Steve, he's going to honor it, you know? And so I'm a lot more likely to make deals with my friend Steve than I am to make deals with my friend Ryan, who's going to backstab me at some point. He's probably going to cheat me. And I think that's the real solution here. You know, don't play with random people you've never heard of.
And we don't need Firaxis or anybody trying to force people to play in certain styles or follow a morality path.
Yes.
Screw your morality. I replace it with my own. And the next thing I have to say is, what about the next game? What about this game?
People are asking for Civ 6 like immediately, just like they were asking for Civ 5 immediately, and pretty much every other iteration.
Well, I mean, it's because every single one of them is the worst game ever when it comes out, and so we need to replace it immediately with the new worst game ever, and then make the old ones look good.
It's kind of true, though. Their release dates have been really bad for a couple games in a row now. Yeah. Like Civ 5 Vanilla, Civ 4 Vanilla, they were both really rough when they came out.
And Civ 3 was rough as it finished.
Yes, I was going to say Civ 3 is rough to this very day.
I don't understand why people are considering it's basically an exploiting a game mechanic for some of the complaints that this guy had. What game mechanic? The one where you're giving him all your stuff? I mean, you don't have to limit yourself to 100 gold. You can give him 3,000 gold for that die.
Yeah, and this is, like, calling that a game mechanic is like claiming that, you know, making a peace treaty in real life is a game mechanic. Like,
there's a mechanic there, but there's no flaw in it. He decided to give that 100 gold over. Yeah. You know, he basically said that he believed that his ally, who probably had military near him if he declared on him 2 turns later, was trustworthy, and that wasn't the case. You know, that's a mistake. You can legitimately interpret that as a mistake, because it is.
If there were no gold per turn option in the game, I would be right with him, but there is a gold per turn option.
Yeah. You can protect yourself against this.
Yes, by saying no.
Absolutely.
Like every time I ask Dan for his money.
Can I have some of your money?
Dan, can I get some money?
$5, please.
Yeah, really, to echo what people have been saying here, that he's asking for in the game to be making a value judgment on what you do or do not do. And it's true that he's not suggesting that you're not going to be able to do something, but rather that if you make a certain choice, then you're going to be penalized for behaving in this particular way. And really, the honor part, that value judgment, that comes down to the people that are playing. Because in one group of people, what is considered an honorable action or an acceptable action, which of course is, honor, so good and bad, right or wrong, moral, not immoral, legal or illegal, it comes down to the people in the group. Taking somebody's worker in one group might be regarded as that wasn't a very honorable thing to do, whereas in another group it might be like, oh, damn, that was smart. How come I didn't do that? Or, okay, you stole my worker. Good idea. I'm going to go and steal
your city.
There you go. Right? So, yeah, it's just, I think honor can be rewarded in any multiplayer game of Civ right now, or even any multiplayer game period, depending upon who you're playing with. And yes, it plays a little bit into the game mechanics, but it comes down to some in-house rules, first of all. And if an in-house rule is you don't steal workers, then the quote-unquote game penalty is the host says, in a discussion, either, hey, that's 1 warning, 2 warnings, 3 warnings, you're out, 3 warnings, you're out right away. Everyone else declares war on that person, even if they don't actually do anything practical to do something on it. So, yeah, it's trying to add a value judgment that's not a game mechanic, but it's not something that's in a personal mechanic. It's a value judgment, and it's a choice.
You're supposed to be able to play the game with backstabbing.
Furthermore, a lot of this stuff, is when you're playing with other humans, you're not limited by the diplomacy mechanics in the game. You could say, hey, Bob over here he wants to make a deal with me, but I think he's going to backstab me. How about, you and I on the side over here, without Bob's knowledge, make a deal that if he backstabs me, I'll give you X gold and we'll go to war with him, and you can't do that with the AIs, but you can do that with a human,
Yeah.
Yep. Toggle the chat panel.
And humans aren't limited to the actual game for revenge. If you're playing there and there's 2 of you two brothers sitting there playing online with some other people, one backstabs the other, I could see one of them turning around and just smacking them.
I was going to say, you hit him in the head.
Or pulling the plug. Or pull the plug on the computer. See you win the game now.
Here, let me send you 3,000 packets per second across this LAN here.
Plus, we have long memories, mostly, sometimes, for stuff like that. So if somebody backstab you, even if you're in the 100th game since the last time you played with them, you're going to remember, hey, that guy backstabbed me.
Yeah, you may not remember exactly how they backstabbed you necessarily, but you remember that emotion because it's a strong emotion, so you're going to respond accordingly.
Yeah, and in the new game, you might not be so nice to them, and you might backstab them. And that's not something a game value judgment can handle, or should. Actually, it shouldn't handle. It probably could, but it's just...
I was about to say, it shouldn't, or at least not very well. At the very least, not very well.
Yes, we should not be trying to force people's values on others in a game that's meant to be played by whatever way you want to.
Yes, we limit our forcing values on other people to real life.
Yes.
It's not worth it in a game.
Yeah, if you declare on me, I'm so going to key your car.
Yep. Oh, but the one thing in this thread that seemed to be actually useful that I saw, Silver Futurist near the end of the thread, is that peace treaties are lasting only 10 turns. It's a good point. Let the players to choose how long the peace treaty actually lasts as part of their negotiation. That makes more sense. So you don't have it stuck like we're at peace for 10 turns or whatever. Maybe you just want to make peace and you go, okay, 5-turn cool off. And then, whatever happens. Or you go, you want to make peace with me? You're going to have to take a peace treaty for 100 turns. Therefore, you can't attack me again. I don't think anybody will sign that, but...
Could, if you really wanted to set up like some collusion where you could then have absolute trust in somebody to not declare on you and vice versa. You could like set up a deal where you declare on each other and then make like a 250-turn peace treaty.
Yeah, and?
Like a literal enforced permanent non-aggression pact or, whatever. That would be really amusing, actually.
Number 7 from episode 142. Yay or nay to incorporating biological warfare in the Civ series is never definitive.
I cannot pronounce this user's name. I will save them the pain of me trying to do that. But he posted in CFC about he would like to see the addition of chemical and biological warfare in Civ 5. He's like, we already have nuclear war in the game, so why not those? It would add an interesting new dynamic to the game once you get into the late industrial, early modern era came around. I guess he's wanting something that's a little more powerful before you actually get nukes. Since he's pointed out historically in that period, they did actually do some of this stuff in World War I, well, at least the chemical. I don't know if anybody's really done the biological except by accident with blankets.
Well, that wasn't exactly by accident.
Yeah. Yes. Accident. Can you see the quote marks around accident? Yes.
Do-do-do-do-do.
And so he's given some examples of how that can use with the biological warfare. Use it against it. It won't kill them right away, since the units in Gaza Kings will have 100 hit points. If a unit's infected, each turn it would lose 10 hit points, even if it's fortified. It would continue to happen for 5 turns. The unit was damaged before it was infected. It has a better chance of dying. And after 5 turns, it starts having a 50% chance that it will recover from the disease and then will start healing up back. He's saying it would add a new dynamic because you have units that are constantly getting damaged. You don't know if they're going to heal or not, but you don't want to just automatically delete them. I wonder if they could actually spread it to other units nearby. You know, like if you had another unit in the next text. Yeah, there's another thing.
Oh, God. I'm just picturing how the AI would try to handle this.
Not well.
Yeah.
The AI is
like it has catapults. I want to throw dead cows over the city walls.
Well, the AI would probably still sit there trying to siege whatever cities it was trying to siege, and I'm getting biological attrition. I don't care. I'm taking the city. I'm taking the city. I'm taking the city. I don't think the AI would recognize how dangerous that would be.
It gives itself because it's at half strength and attacks with like 6 units against the city, and it's just a meat grinder. Yeah, it would be fun, certainly.
Well, so chemical warfare, it's kind of like the artillery version of this, except it would affect all units within a certain tile range. I guess like if you lobbed it at 1 hex, all the hexes around it would also get affected.
Crowd control in Civ 5, though?
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, what do you think? It's already hard to maneuver, but now you have to worry about adjacent hexes with, like, area damage. That would be pretty rough, given that the maps are not, they don't have that many tiles, or I should say hexes, between cities.
Yeah, he's saying, like, only 10 or 20 hit points when it hits. And, well, okay, certain tiles outlined in red, maybe 4 or something like that. You know, so maybe not the whole full thing, but still adjacent tiles.
Yeah, kind of like even we've got with nuclear weapons now, that if it's a chemical warfare and you're targeting a particular hex, then you get kind of the rock in a pond, like the ripple effect that it affects outward tiles, but not to the same extent.
I guess, if you made it weak enough.
The cloud hangs in the tile for a while, so you sort of make it like a tile that damages any unit that passes through it for the next 4 turns.
Yeah, he wanted it to be a short effect, though, like only 1 turn of having that cloud hang around, so you could just avoid it for a turn, and then you could move back in after it cleared up.
Yeah, whereas the biological warfare would be a little longer lasting. He gets into some specifics in terms of turn numbers and percentage, and besides balance, he'd want to scale that with different game speeds and whatnot. But if people are going to actively take these measures to go on the offensive, as long as I have means to defend myself, perhaps I'm going to have units on the front line. Maybe there's a promotion, and I'm not saying a new promotion. I don't think we need new promotions, but adding something to the existing promotion that if you choose this, then you also get a greater chance to be resistant to this. Or in the case of biological warfare, you know, you're not going to take as long as it needs in order to heal, or you have a better chance of actually healing in the first place. Or is there some building if someone wanted to target a city specifically for biological or chemical warfare? I mean, he seems to be focusing on going after particular units. But I could also see people saying, well, how about biological and chemical warfare targeting in the city where perhaps the effect isn't so much as the units in the city as it is the city itself. I realize we don't have health, so now it would affect happiness or something like that. Well, then would there be a building that could help counter that? As long as I've got a counter to some of these things, I think this could work.
Well, I think it would probably work pretty well with multiplayer. I just worry... I mean, I think the AI could handle the chemical one the way he's described it. I don't know if the AI could understand the biological one as well. I mean, it could understand to use it, but not to prevent all of its units getting infected or something.
I don't know. It reminds me of how the AI handled Zone of Control back in the day when you were still using that, where you'd put units in a certain way and you just funnel them into killing fields over and over and over again.
Derp, this is the only gap.
It looks like these... It looks like this mechanic could be used to create your own personal chokes and effectively create zones of control where, I mean, I guess you could move into the death cloud, but we probably wouldn't want to do it. And the AI would probably, well, either the AI would do it and that would be abused, or the AI would avoid it and that would be abused. But since it wouldn't have like dynamic evaluation of when it's worth it to move in there versus not, it'd be really difficult. Yeah. But it would still be an interesting feature.
Another question to me is, what would the delivery mechanism of the biological or the chemical warfare be? Would it be like with nuclear weapons where it is an actual unit? I mean, that would seem to be the most practical. But there was also with the chemical warfare, partially what you were saying there, Phil, the user, and I'm going to try to pronounce the user's name, unlike Mackie, because if I butcher it, I don't really care. Aluald.
That was a good try.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Hey, as far as you know, that's accurate.
Dan, this is why I didn't try. Do you think my username's hard to pronounce? Welp. You should see this.
You can't fault Dan yet. He might have pronounced it correctly. We don't know.
Mackie, I was also using it as an opportunity to clear my throat, so there was a health benefit for trying to say this person's username.
Uh-huh. Right.
He says with regards to chemical warfare, and you could unintentionally damage your own troops with chemical warfare too if they are located in adjacent tiles. I laughed at the gameplay implications of that, and maybe that should also go with the biological warfare too. I'm just thinking, I know you're trying to look at a counter to in terms of if this is going to be really strong, what's the negative? You know, I think about Civilization 4 building a nuclear plant, the potential of being a meltdown, and the significance of that. And I started to think about this, and I thought, no, I'd rather it just maybe not be as strong as might otherwise be implied, as opposed to this unintentional damaging your own troops. I mean, it's kind of like with the Fallout, right? When you nuke a city and you want to move your units in, your units don't move as fast anymore.
I do think chemical warfare could be an interesting part of a World War I scenario. To echo what Phil was saying earlier, you just need a little more space on the map to really get any kinds of, clouds of gas or whatever between cities. So I think it could be a cool idea in a scenario, even if it doesn't make sense in the full game.
Number 6. From episode 158, the place, if any, for random number generator dependency for in-game combat begins.
Civilization 4, what if combat wasn't RNG dependent? And the main team may have a few things to say about that, seeing as how he started the thread.
Yes. Started by the legendary forum troll. Yeah, I finally got a thread on the show again. Anyway, this is something we've been working on. I've been asked not to get too far till on the mod itself just yet. We are working on a mod for it. But basically, the premise of this thread is to ask exactly what Dan said on the 10 there with the thread title. What if combat was not dependent on the random number generator and instead resolved based solely upon the relative strength of the units, such that a stronger unit always wins? And this has created a tremendous amount of controversy and feedback of all kinds in a very short period of time. Since I started the thread. It's already on page 7, and it's only been out not even 2 weeks yet. So it's been very interesting debating against people in this thread. There's a lot of conceptions that I'm observing. People thinking that combat suddenly becomes bland and undynamic really need to see the game in practice, because you have all these kinds of, damaged units calculations. You have promotions factoring in. You have whether or not you're taking collateral damage, or if they're using fodder troops to initialize damage on you, and how many of them they want to sacrifice. It's not as simple as people like Mylene are making it out to be. And you take a lot more damage under this mod because the deterministic outcomes are weighted as such that if you will win if you're attacking at what would have previously been like 60% odds, but your unit's going to be redlined. So you have to really play in carefully, and it really helps to know your enemy, because if you don't, well, you're going to get followed up and killed even if you have a more advanced unit. So it's been an interesting experience so far, but yes, always, if you have the stronger unit, it'll win.
Yeah, we played with this for a little game last weekend, and One thing I noticed is that you have to pull the units back. You're not going to just run up a stack and have it only get like half damage. If this unit wins, a lot of the time it takes 3/4 damage, even if it's a stronger unit. So you have to spend a lot more time healing. Those super great medics that we thought were getting useless, they're not useless anymore.
They were never useless, but they're almost critical now. We're working on balancing that a little bit better, making drill a bit stronger. We reworked drill also. Well, I should say we reworked for strikes completely differently, obviously, because you don't have these combat rounds any longer. So the previous combat round mechanic that went through strikes doesn't make sense any longer. So now drill reduces damage. We've been playing with withdrawals and things like that as well. The medic as well is something we're looking at, possibly taking away the ability for the medic promotion to provide healing to other units. That way you have to have a trade-off between damage reduction in the event that you win, just straight-up combat strength, or the ability to heal quickly. And we'll see what kind of gameplay that gets.
So it's kind of like Civ 5 combat. At the core.
I shouldn't say always, but almost always someone dies. So
almost always somebody dies.
Stacks. You can have fights in Civ 5 very often where both units live.
Oh, yeah. You should probably go for that, too.
It's not so true in this mod.
Well, I mean, what I mean is more the core of it, where the combat strengths are basically used as the relative damage output rather than just like a percentage. So it's always based on the combat damage, and everything's all based on the actual unit statistics, not random number generator. Although there is a few RNG stuff in there.
There's no RNG component at all in combat. We're trying to get away from that entirely. This is just too frustrating. And when you're playing in these weekly multiplayer games, not even against each other, but just cooperatively, one of the biggest problems is, okay, you have 6 people. So now you have 6 times the likelihood that somebody gets hosed by the RNG. And if that person gets hosed, they're going to be waiting for the other 5 players to hit end turn because they're not going to have a whole lot to do with their small empire, not many units. So that was part of the original impetus for this mod, was that. But I think this could be applied to the general gameplay experience quite well. And I don't see the need, having just done a little bit of testing with deterministic combat, why we had to rely so heavily on the RNG. It's like it's a poison in people's minds, the way I'm seeing it now, where they think you need an RNG to have a turn-based strategy work, and that's just not true. It isn't.
Well, I mean, even with Civ 5, there's a very, very tiny RNG in there, but it's on the spread of the damage. So all of the calculations for how much damage is going to happen to either side is already purely calculated based on statistics. But then there's a very tiny spread up or down that throws in the, okay, well, maybe something didn't quite go well, but it's not as bad as in Civ 4. I find that useful. I mean, you can't always predetermine a battle, especially in real life. But obviously this is a game, not real life. So I think just a tiny amount of RNG in the calculation, even if it's just like maximum 10% of the possible damage or something like that, just to add a little bit of flavor in there.
You see, I think some of those quote-unquote real-life things can be modeled not based on RNG, but by your opponent doing something unexpected, which is kind of what happened in real life, right? I mean, some of the major historical losses didn't happen because of a dice roll, but rather because somebody screwed up. And as the player, you're the one controlling your military, and your opponent's controlling his military. So rather than having the RNG decide that you screwed up, you legitimately screwed up, or your opponent did something unexpected, or he screwed up instead, and that's what's causing the difference here. Civ 5 is a different model.
Even for what you're going for in the mod, just a tiny amount, because it's at the low level, because right now what you're talking about is the macro level management. You're not showing the micro level, and that's what a tiny amount of RNG in there would help with, micro level stuff. Because. But
why? What does that do for the game? Okay, you might just want to see some RNG there, but strictly speaking, how does that really improve gameplay to have that happen?
Well, it's not all perfectly deterministic.
But what's wrong with being perfectly deterministic?
The game's not a spreadsheet, damn it.
I wondered how long it would take for somebody said that.
Everyone falls back on that. I hate that.
No. It provides some variety. Like, you can't go, I build exactly these 3 units, and I go crush all your stuff because I'm so far ahead in tech. There has
I know they keep bringing that up, that I could just calculate that it takes this many units. No, you can't, because there's still variables on where the AI moves its units and other things. It's not going to be exactly that. I thought I had plenty of Force Archers the other night, but I did not. I took the one city and I never could take the other city because he kept sending things up to attack me.
Other things include, whether the enemy decides to take drill or combat, or if they go medic. Other things including defensive bonuses, fortification bonuses. Yeah, whether they have walls, castles, who gets initiative, collateral damage. There is a lot of things that can convolute the whole pre-planned myth very, very quickly. And if you try to go in with quote-unquote just enough units, you are going to die horribly.
That's what happened to me.
From the chat, Canadian Wolverine, RNG isn't necessary, especially with tile bonuses. You don't need the RNG for the micro. And Asiro says, RNG is just to reflect the reality of war. It's not a chess game.
Hey, look, the same argument over and over and over again. But I'd like some actual gameplay justifications for RNG. I mean, aside from just personal preference, everyone's going to have their personal preferences. But it's not a chess game is not an argument. I'm looking for reasons, legitimate reasons, why the RNG is a significant boon to gameplay aside from your personal preference. And if it's, again, if you like it, whatever. I mean, it's in the base game. You can certainly play with the RNG. But I don't see a need per se for it, and I don't see what it really adds to gameplay beyond preference.
But for me, and again, as Phil mentioned also, very much the impetus for this was cooperative play. And I'm not saying that I don't think that this couldn't be applied to the game more broadly, but in that cooperative situation where there is that RNG, and towards what Kay and Wolverine has said, that the reality of war is the one who comes better prepared wins. Well, you get better prepared, you could have all of the units that you need, and you could make poor decisions about when to attack and where to attack, but still, it's that situation where, strictly based on the random number generator, you have lost substantially. You're now in a situation where, again, in that cooperative situation, you're sitting there turn after turn after turn. If you can even stand to do that, sometimes we just say, and I've done this myself, I don't see myself getting out of this hole.
Rage quit.
Yeah, it's not even a situation of I'm stuck back to where I was. I'm now actually in a worse position than where I started, even though I was better prepared for war than the person I was going after. And now I could lose. That could be the end of my civilization. And in a cooperative situation where you're sitting there ending turn, or you're rage quitting, if you end up leaving, it's true that maybe your civilization isn't in a very good situation. But sometimes, understandably, people get frustrated and they leave, and then by our own in-house rules, we might say, oh, now someone has to go take out so-and-so's civilization so that we can end the game because now the AI has taken over and that's another opponent.
For the argument in the chat about better prepared equals more likely to win, I'll just go back to paraphrasing an old goodie. The best laid plans are completely useless the moment you use them.
Do not need an orange for that, though.
Yeah, so better prepared is one thing, but the moment you actually start doing something, plans are somewhat more useless than normal, unless your opponent, of course, is letting you do your plan. I definitely think that your mod, the mod as discussed, is going to make Civ 4 combat a lot better. Obviously, RNG, luck fight versus slightly more deterministic approach.
We're all tired of losing 90% odd battles.
Well, just anything. It's like, I've got 99.99% chance to win this. Great. I'm going to lose everything.
What your unit does.
You mean I have 99% chance to lose? Right.
And a word goes to Magin for dropping the F-bomb on the first episode.
Man, just lighting up that whippoorwill.
I was paraphrasing Phil.
He's Canadian. So therefore him saying...
Paraphrasing.
Number 10 from episode 153.
Well, saying nothing is saying something.
Oh, that's true, but I couldn't come up with anything witty.
It's okay. I think only Phil and Dan ever get around to doing something that witty.
Yeah, this is when Dan ever gets around to witty.
Yeah, it may take some time, though.
I think I've just been insulted.
Oh, let me try. I'll try harder next time.
Why do you have to be such a do-well, Mackie? I mean, try hard.
Number 9 from episode 151.
Yeah, Yeah, and you wouldn't want to dive into the gold like Scrooge McDuck did on DuckTales. That would hurt like heck. No, kids, don't try this at home.
Yeah, gold has a fair amount of viscosity, as in it's a solid, not a liquid.
I know gold is malleable, but not the human body really isn't going to be able to provide that.
It's cartoon gold. It magically works like water, guys. Come on.
Unless you rub yourself in oil first.
I don't know what kind of podcast you think we're on here, John. But,
That's gold.
Number 8 from episode 138.
I got a 50% raise this year. I'm happy.
Ah.
For PolyCast, that is.
Oh, 50% of nothing? What?
Pretty much. Details, Mackie. Drink more coffee, then you'll be excited about your 50% raise also.
actually, Mackie got more than that, but she was just not wanting to say. She was trying to be, sensitive to your feelings. But
yeah, I got 75% of nothing.
Wait, what? Why would you be sensitive to my feelings? I don't understand.
Phil's so familiar with this whole being nice thing.
Number 7 from episode 146.
I think just every city in the game needs to have a giant bust of my face, in the center of the city. Other than that, I don't have to be too controlling of the cities. They just need that in the city center.
I'm sorry, all I heard was bust. I just...
Dan, come on. I was going to just say for Phil, we could just change the city tile to the troll face.
Every city.
Troll face. Well, I guess I found Phil's territory.
Number 6 from episode 150.
If you're looking up her name in the show, be sure to look for the Lisa T.
Oh, yes.
Never mind.
The bit about you correcting Phil about having
the Lisa.
Oh.
I still remember that argument.
I was about to say, Lisa, did you remember any of those clips? Like, you started hearing it and you thought, I remember how the rest of this goes, more or less?
I may or may not have been under the influence of... No, just kidding. I didn't...
Caffeine.
That's quite the confession.
What are you talking about? No, I'm just...
What are you talking about? That's a central element to the quality of the show of certain substances.
PUI, polycasting under the influence.
Number 5 from episode 159. The place, if any, for random number generator dependency for in-game combat continues.
Post by Shaglio. That's a funny name. But he was listening to the latest installment of PolyCast and said it got him to thinking about the RNG. I have to say I prefer it for a variety of reasons. 1, a unit in Civ is a representation of a group of soldiers, and in that group are many different people and personalities. The randomness of the RNG could represent one soldier's human error. No matter how well the general prepares for the battle, he still needs to rely on all his soldiers to perform their duties properly. Maybe a soldier sneezes and blows the unit's cover. Maybe a soldier has an itchy trigger finger and fires before he sees the whites of their eyes. Maybe in the chaos and confusion of battle, a soldier accidentally kills an ally. You need better soldiers. That's the solution right there. 2, weather and other environmental factors also play a role in combat. A general might strategize to take into account his and his enemy's moves, but a sudden thunderstorm or blizzard rolls in, or if there's an earthquake. Well, now, come on. If there's an earthquake, how often does that randomly happen?
On the battlefield.
Yeah, on the battlefield. Seriously. Circumstances may change. RNG can account for these situations in a way, short of simulating weather events, that some people who have been asking for. And really, guys, you want weather events back? You want hurricanes wiping out your cities again?
Volcanoes. We talked about the weather events on the show before.
Third,
yes, we might have touched on it.
He's a huge sports fan, and he's in an NFL pick'em league with his family, where they attempt to predict who's going to win which week. And no matter how much the statistics suggest that Team A is going to beat Team B, sometimes Team B actually wins. A multitude of reasons why that occurs, and this can be likened to a universal RNG of sorts. Now, the Team A and Team B thing, the problem is with the Civ RNG, Team B winning is happening a little too often.
So you can't really say Team B won on random factors. Sometimes... the players actually make choices or just play better than people expected them to play. There's not a whole lot of random in most sports. it's all player choice. It might seem random, but each outcome was a decision of something the players decided to do.
And, well, there's random number generators in games, and I don't think there's random number generator in football. The difference between real life is that random things can actually randomly happen. In games, it's all pseudo-random, because you can't make a real random generator for a game to mimic life. So that's why games seem a little bit more wonked than what would normally happen in real life. But even still, random number generators can be built to at least pretend to be okay.
And before Mackie continues reading the rest of Shaglio's post, what he's responding to, when he said he was listening to the latest installment, yes, that would be episode 158, seeing as how this is 159. And specifically, it was recorded for episode 152, over whether or not Civilization 4 combat should be random number generator dependent, as well as a modding effort by the Me and team, as well as MLS, a frequent PolyCast guest co-host, to actually change this structure. So no doubt Phil will have, and probably the rest of us too, will have more to say on that in a moment. But Shaglio's post continues.
Life is chaotic and unpredictable, and the RNG exemplifies this perfectly. I don't know about that, but knowing that in the same terrain with the same promotions, Unit A will always do 34 points of damage to Unit B makes the game too predictable and formulaic. With that knowledge, you can surmise that we need exactly 3 of Unit A to kill Unit B. There's a certain degree of fun in not knowing whether these 3 Unit A's will take out Unit B or if you need to bring in another unit to finish things off. Part of the excitement of Civ games is adapting your strategies when things don't go exactly according to plan. You can argue that the ability to improvise your plan and overcome unanticipated obstacles is what makes the difference between a so-so player and a good player, and a good player and a great player. He, for one, looks forward to the challenge. It's not that formulaic to know you're going to do a certain amount of damage. I mean, when we play Civ 4, we see that we don't know exactly how many units we're going to need. We look at there's 3 archers defending that city. I better bring at least 6, preferably 8, of whatever I'm using for attacking, because sometimes they get a lot of lucky shots.
In practice, a lot of these things that people brought up as concerns, and we have not played as much Civ 4 after only a couple test runs of this mod, so we don't have the same body of evidence I would like to have for making arguments for it. But in practice, you can't really plan out, I'm going to need these 6 axes to beat those 2 or 3 archers, because you don't know what the opponent can bring in addition to that city and the time it takes you to move there. And then, okay, you might want to run away, but that has its own things as well. There's a lot of unknowns, even if the outcome of an individual battle is unknown. And a lot of that does come down to what your opponent decides to do. It's still decidedly more dynamic than he's making it seem in the post. And part of that's because he's never played the mod, but that's to be expected. I don't think we ever did release that to public. It was still a work in progress when we kind of got away from playing Civ 4 a whole lot on the weekend multiplayer games. But even so, it played pretty well, honestly, and it was refreshing to not get game-breaking wise on random outcomes. And that is something that you do have to balance between reality and gameplay considerations. On the one hand, yes, having some random outcomes or having some unexpected outcomes is realistic, but on the other, it can completely destroy the strategy aspect of the game, because no matter how good of choices you make, you lose. So, there's good to have some random elements that cause extra thinking to be involved. Okay, do I want to take this risk now or later? Or do I want to minimize the risk before I go in, whatever? And it's so common that, a couple outcomes are changing the game. That's a pretty big problem in a strategy game. You can't have that either.
Yeah. Well, even in Civ 5, if you take it as a basis, Unit A will always do 34 points of damage. Well, yeah, it's kind of like that in Civ 5, except that even there, since most of the calculation is not random, there's still at least a small amount in the damage formula that is randomized to cover these sorts of unpredictable type stuff, where a unit might survive a little longer, or the unit might do a little extra damage.
This is one of the more brilliant design implementations that Civ 5 had, though, in my opinion, because not only are you still getting some RNG elements, but you're still not having game-breaking instant deaths happen virtually ever. It's pretty rare that you get completely hosed like that in Civ 5.
I think I had it recorded. I had a tank go attack an infantry and insta-died in one shot.
Yeah.
That was an RNG.
It happens.
Mess, but
often does that happen, though? I mean, like, on a factor of occurrence, it's probably less common than the Vedic Aryans event in Civ 4 killing you instantly at the start of the game if you had events on. Usually you do some damage, and then you have some choices on how you want to handle it, how in terms of damage you did and take. That's the vast majority of cases.
Yeah, I mean, it's rare, but that's the point. It can happen, and that's fine. It's fine that it can happen. It just shouldn't be so random that it's just not worth showing up.
Yeah.
It's just, Spearman versus Tank is funny the first few times, but when that keeps repeatedly happening in the same game, that's when you rage quit. That's all we're not asking for the RNG to be completely predictable, but we're asking for a little less of the extreme outcomes, just a, tiny bit.
But that's fine. You had the one game where you had multiple Spear versus Tank losses, and, well, the Spear won, but you know what? The other million people who played didn't have a game like that, so you took it for the team.
Why am I taking things for the team, man?
Mackie had mentioned, even kind of going back to the start, about you don't know how many units you're going to need, what types of units you're going to need, but even if you could come up with that, then it's okay, where should that unit be situated? What turn should that unit be situated? Which unit should attack first? What unit should it attack first? And then also combined with, you don't know, okay, on this turn, it looks like that there are these 10 units, so I'm going to situate myself right where they are. Well, in those 10 turns, those units could move away. Those units could be replaced. Those units could find themselves fortified. So there still is this, like he says, part of the excitement of Civ games is adapting your strategies when things don't go exactly according to plan. We don't often think about the extreme, by the way, of, you know what, I just won 5 30% battles in a row. You're probably thinking, sweet, but should that really have happened? No, especially if it's happening again and again and again and again. So it's one of those situations where you want the random element, but it's when it's happening again and again and again, you could argue that's being too much like a real life unknown, and this is supposed to be fun. And I think most people's element of fun would include some measure of, if not predictability, then reasonability, that the potential risk is balanced to the potential gain. And when you have those extremes, once in a while is one thing, but when it happens again and again and again, you start questioning, well, does this mean I have to start playing illogically? Or do I have to start second-guessing myself? Or am I just not going to play at all? And at least in that moment, you're probably not going to play at all for a while, and you're going to rage quit.
Number 4, from episode 149. Compensation, if any, for failing to construct the wonder of the world in Civ has no final answer.
Whether or not you should get fail gold at all, whether or not you should get fail anything, and whether or not, in fact, that the fail gold is, more even to the point of the OP, that it can be even overpowered. It has to be a user's name that I'm going to have to sound out phonetically here. Celibithel says, being a compensation for failing, it should not be the main goal of building the wonder in the first place. Thus, the compensation should at most be what you could have gotten otherwise.
Yes. Another debate I remember being a part of in some fashion or another. I'm not sure if it was this thread or a different thread. A lot of these things are repeat cycles, I tell you. You've posted in the forum for a few years, and you see the same arguments in different threads. But the problem with that is it's not. A lot of the wonders are not sufficiently useful to be worth building. But I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with the fail gold mechanic itself, because if it were truly overpowered, it would be consistently better than your alternatives, and that is not true in Civ 4. Fail gold from chopping into wonders is not consistently better than your alternative. Sometimes you'll be chopping into granaries. Sometimes you'll be chopping into units. Sometimes you need gold right this instant, and therefore you'll be building wealth. And sometimes your worker turns, you just don't have that many workers that you want to divert to chopping. You'd rather be improving special tiles first, for example. So it's not such an easy consideration as it's overpowered because you can get fail gold at a impressive conversion rate of hammers to gold. And yes, that's useful, but there's a time and a place for it. And because of that, I would argue that the wonders themselves are underpowered rather than fail gold being overpowered. But that's just from a gameplay logic standpoint. Is if Wonder is so useless that you would never care to finish it, that's bad.
The fail gold mechanic was a godsend for gameplay. Remember, the alternative in Civ 3 was basically to rage quit. If you spent an even larger proportional amount of your production trying to get the pyramids or something, and you lost it by one turn and were compensated with a screw you, then, I mean, yeah, it was not nearly as enjoyable as, well, you didn't get the pyramids, but here's 350 gold. See if you can do something interesting with that.
Oh, don't you remember when you could if you weren't successful in getting the wonder, and I forget, maybe it was Civ 2 and earlier, that you just transfer the committed hammers to a different wonder?
I thought you could do that in Civ 3, although recall that they were shields back then. But other than that,
Shield,
I thought you could do that in Civ 3 too. Maybe I don't recall correctly. I know you could do it in Civ 2. I think if you switched between types, unit versus standard building versus wonder, you would take a penalty. And with sufficient microplanning, although, geez, I never did any microplanning at all before Civ 4, and even now I'm not known for it. But with microplanning, you could probably get away with failing a wonder and then simply reallocating it into a different wonder as a fallback plan. But that's
well. The thing about building the pyramids was the only thing you could transfer the hammers into often would be a spearman. So
yeah, that's not so ideal.
And this is a bit of a tangent, but it's still on Civ. In Civilization Revolution, what that would mean is that all that production invested in a particular wonder, and you didn't get it, and actually even wasn't to fail gold, you could just transfer that to say, okay, build me, say, spearmen, for example, and it would just give you X number of spearmen to however or how many hammers you invested. So you could have like 10, 15, 20, boom, instant.
Now that sounds like an abusable fail mechanic.
Very.
Yes.
I'm going to build the
You declared war on me, huh? Well, guess what?
My invasion plans involve building the Colossus of Rhodes and the pyramids simultaneously in two to what?
Oh, so we're not going to be promoting this for Civ 6? No?
Man, talk about hiding your power and demographics until the last moment. Jeez.
Dan likes his clever and cunning plan.
Number 3, from episode 163. When someone questions the continued presence of a technology tree in a civilization title, players take notice.
This next thread is started by John Yoga, and it is titled, The Tech Tree, Why Bother? Hello folks, I will show my ignorance here. Why bother with having the tech tree? You need each tech piece anyway to get to the next stage, and they are all intertwined and interdependent. Therefore, why bother even having this in the game? Sure, you can bias yourself with a small amount of turns down one avenue, but so what? You need to backtrack and fill in the order of tech pieces anyway, sooner versus than later. What am I missing? At present, it's just a silly micromanagement piece, like that of constantly having workers being clicked, knowing that the auto AI management doesn't always work. This is an amusing thread, and I'm not sure if we're supposed to take this seriously in the first place. Because, why play the game, right? Like, it's a game, so it doesn't matter. Why play it?
I want my I win button. I don't want to do anything.
I don't have to think of that with Tech Path. This is a strategy game. Why don't I have to strategize, man?
You know what, though? You know what he should do? He should just take my suggestion of going down the honor path and building nothing but units. Only units. Lots of units. And then he won't have to worry about the tech tree a whole lot.
I also have a suggestion. The user John Yoga, who says his name is Mark, play Risk. You don't have to worry about a tech tree and Risk.
True.
You're welcome.
Please hand your copy of Civ 5 to somebody else and stop.
Stop the madness.
Hopefully point out that going down one tech avenue first can provide a tremendous advantage that lasts throughout the game. But most of the game are aware of that, so I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Basically, yeah, I don't find much of what he says in here credible, but that's just me.
I do hate that automation is so worthless that you can't use it ever.
Well, the AI automation is crap, so we all know that. Whatever. Never let the AI do anything that you can do. And there's no such thing as silly micromanagement, unless it's, of course, to silly micro click the button on workers every single turn because you have to. Usually when you tell something to do it, it generally does it. And then you don't have to silly micro by telling it to do it every single turn. That would be silly. Choosing technologies in a tech tree because you have to make strategic choices about what you would like to have. That's not silly micromanagement. That's just,
It's not even micromanagement.
It's, I know.
Not micro.
It's like, what are we going to do today? Let's research writing. Great. Next turn. What are we going to do today? I know. Let's research writing.
Yeah, that would be terrible.
Yeah, that would be horrible. This seems like a trollolol thread.
Yeah, that was its original intent, then okay, I can accept.
I don't think it was...
It did its job. That was its intent.
Later on the first page, John Yoga follows up. Perhaps there needs to be greater, further-reaching tech stealing and tech sabotage abilities and more accidental discoveries in the game.
Yes, please give me more stuff for free, and please don't let me think.
And at random, too, I might add. He wants randomness. Oh, I know. Let's add skill equalization to the game in greater volumes. Let's just ask for it directly. That's probably the best way to go.
Yeah.
Well, why sugarcoat it? Just ask for skill equalization. That's good.
Yep.
It's all good.
Yep. Whoever the leader is, they have to give away everything to everybody, because...
Yeah.
Yep.
Or everybody will just randomly discard all their technologies.
Another volley in the thread from John Yoga. I think what I've learned from others on this thread is that my playing quick and or easier difficulty settings may be why I'm not seeing the tech tree usage as germane. Spreading out the time must really matter.
No. Even on quick speed, there's choices.
Yeah. And they matter because you get things soon. Not to mention that the game itself goes by sooner, so a couple turns advantage matters a lot on quick.
Yeah. Oh, and then later somebody told him to come to my Beyond the Monument series and watch my videos. So he's probably eventually going to hear this.
Well, good. It'll be educational. Now that you know how wrong you are.
Yeah, it's probably not what he's going to think. But oh well. I do not care for crap. There is no slingshots to catch the leader. There is no BS. Get stuff for free. That is not strategy. Suck it up. Learn. Play. Win.
There's a slingshot to catch the leader. It's called Dogpile.
That's not quite what we had in mind there, yeah.
Well, it's effective. It will work.
It's super effective.
Phil just said that to meet the trolling requirements of his contract for this show.
Yeah, I think so.
Yes.
That's okay. No, the auto dogpile, that does count, but that is in there. Well, that's slightly different. And you can win that dogpile, so
You can.
Number 2, from episode 161. Comparing corruption, maintenance and happiness as empire management methods continues to resonate.
Corruption versus city maintenance versus global happiness. Corruption. Stupid. I don't think I'm going to try this username, but he said, once I felt corruption was a bad system and that scrapping it would unleash the player just for him to be able to rule full capacity cities. Then city maintenance came, and he hated the system because it was too obscure. Then came global happiness. I'm hating the system since Prince difficulty. I always feel I have not enough. I can find absolutely no synergy with my other occupations, aka conquering or expanding. I have to wait long, long times for my happiness is up again.
Corruption lowers the total trade goods intake in cities on the fringes and the frontiers when you have an empire that sprawls over a great area. In Civilization 1, depending upon your type of government and the city's distance from your palace, some trade may be lost. As corruption, the farther your city containing your palace, your capital, the more corruption was lost by trade. In Civilization 2, it was very similar, where resource output can be lost through corruption. In many games, the amount of corruption was heavily dependent on a city's distance from the civilization's capital, as well as the overall number of cities controlled by the civilization. And the amount of corruption also depends on the presence of certain improvements that reduce corruption, such as courthouses, which also appeared in Civilization 1, and also the type of government 2. In Civilization 3, the Conquests expansion, which was the second expansion for Civ 3, and then Civilization 3 Complete, which included Conquest, the first expansion, Play the World, and Vanilla Civ 3, it changed it a little bit over what corruption was initially in Civ 3, so I'm going to summarize on that point. where the total corruption in each city was equal to the sum of two independent components, distance corruption and rank corruption. If you had a non-communal government type, say despotism, distance corruption depends on the distance from each city from its closest palace, which is either the palace or the forbidden palace, which counteracted distance but not rank corruption. Civilization 3 introduced that. Rank corruption in a city depends on how many other cities are closer than that city to the palace. So you kind of saw that in Civilization 2, but then you had a specific, separate name for that and part of the formula. If you had a communal type government in Civ 3, then distance corruption did not actually depend on distance because each city was considered to be the same distance from the palace. You had choosing a commercial civilization to reduce corruption in your cities. Kind of saw that with an indirect way, say in Civilization 4 with the financial trait that would help you with your economy while you were expanding, for example, peacefully or not so peacefully. Still building appropriate city improvements, which of course you see in Civilization 4 and Civilization 5. Now, of course, in Civilization 5, the courthouses get to when you are annexing a city. And of course, Wonders of the World. Connecting your cities to your trade network for your empire also reduced corruption. And Civilization 3, I even had to stop and think about this for a moment. There were specialists. You could assign citizens to be policemen, where one policeman meant that one corrupted commerce and one wasted shield became uncorrupted. And then in Civilization 4, the manual goes into detail about why they moved from corruption to city maintenance. And I'm going to summarize here with introducing maintenance over corruption. Quote, "We were both right and wrong. The change did put an end to building as many cities into as tight a space as possible, but it was also the number one complaint about the game. Gamers simply didn't like having their production taken away from them. There was nothing fun about founding a city and then finding out it could only ever produce one shield a turn. A revamped maintenance system could provide a subtle resistance against building more cities, being the only quote-unquote best choice." And then for Civilization 5, global happiness, with the only restriction being the buildings that purely provided happy would only reduce unhappiness by the amount of citizens in the city and couldn't do more than that. And then local happiness was the happiness generated from buildings, not wonders, and is used to negate population unhappiness in a specific city.
One other detail, though, because again, you have, if you want to take it into the consideration of what the limiters are, more cities equals more buildings equals more building maintenance in Civ 5. So you do actually pay more for more cities, gold-wise. And that can ruin your economy, because once you go negative in your gold per turn and you've run out of gold, then you lose science until you go bankrupt.
So he wants to know what the system is that everybody else prefers. And right now, city maintenance is winning, but then there's only about 13 votes in this poll so far.
Now there's 14.
Oh, now there's 14. Yeah, we don't want corruption back. Do we all remember having to place our cities in a certain pattern? The rings thing in Civ 3 and
the definition of ICS?
Yeah.
Actually, imagine you're wrong. There's 15 votes now in the poll.
Wait, let me log into CFC. We can have 16.
It's not a secret ballot. It's disclosed to the interwebs what you voted. I don't know if people noticed that or not, but it's one of those open polls.
It's an open poll.
Now that's a segue.
Yeah.
I'd suggest that it's hard for people to see between these options without imposing the way the rest of the system worked too. So the systems are very similar. They're kind of different ways of getting, they are exactly different ways of getting at the same thing. But when you judge, do you like corruption or city maintenance or global happiness, you're really judging, do I like the economic systems of this game as compared to this game as compared to this game?
I like global happiness. It's to me, it's transparent, which was the thing with the corruption and the city maintenance.
And, well, it also has local happiness now, so they kind of forgot part of it.
Yeah, I was about to say.
They kind of forgot part of the mechanic.
The local happiness of the Civilization 5 expansion Gods and King introduced.
To me, at least, it's more transparent than trying to figure out city maintenance or corruption. It's right there in front of you. You have this local happiness, you have this happiness.
In a previous iteration of Civ, prior to 5, they really, really, really needed to tell you the rules, and they didn't. It was very asinine that it took a lot of work to determine how much extra maintenance you would pay on an additional city, or, to what extent corruption would be hitting you before you planted the city. That's not real difficulty at all. That's garbage that you have to find out, that you have to bend over backwards to figure that.
Yes, in 5, you still have to watch how you're building your cities, but it's more obvious when you're getting close to that limit and you need to stop and build upwards instead of out.
Yeah.
How are you not finding more happiness if you're conquering things?
If you're on Prince, really.
There's something to be said, though. Like, if you really want one of those continent-stretching empires with, like, 20, 30 cities, that's not exactly easy for a typical person to manage in Civ 5. Whereas in the previous games, you could pull that off pretty well. Well, I'm just
you can't manage
saying,
it, you shouldn't do it.
That's what Civ was to a lot of people before Civ 5. So if you try to do that in Civ 5, the mechanic's going to punish you like crazy.
Yeah, but if you tried to ICS in Civ 4, the mechanics would beat the crap out of you, too.
Yeah, city maintenance for that number of cities, if you win ICS, was just insane.
Yeah, so that's not a valid complaint.
So like 10 to 12 cities in the BC sometimes in Civ 4 and still be running at a positive, sometimes even researching well if the land was really good. It's really only Civ 5 that you, like Majin said, want to hold yourself to, like the 4 or 5 cities. The previous games, that wasn't true at all.
You can still go to the 10, 12 cities easily. It's just you need to know what you're doing.
Is it optimized?
Is it optimal? Maybe.
Plan for that was optimized. Whereas in Civ 5, you seem to be implying otherwise most of the time.
If you know what you're doing, you can ICS very easily. Have 10, 12 cities by the Renaissance, more, 20, depending on the map size, and still be happy. There are ways to do it.
You know, that's not to say that Civ 5 is bad, but it's very different from a city spam side of things.
Well, I think
so was Civ 4.
I think there was a pretty focused attempt in Civ 5 to allow those smaller empires to play and maybe even encourage smaller empires just on average. So instead of talking about, remember the Civ 3 days, the huge empires, of never running at that size and getting them bound to, you have less cities, but, they're bigger cogs of your machine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I decided I would go ahead and vote in this poll now since, why would I do it before we started recording the show? Kale did the same thing, so we're actually up to 17 votes now. Mackie, you're not on board here.
I can't remember my CFC login.
Makalua?
Well, no, my password. Let me be more specific there. I had to change it at some point.
529.
No.
The poll now at 17. Let's update the numbers. Man, this is just like election night.
Yeah, except that we're constantly voting.
Sliding afterwards.
Corruption and city maintenance are neck and neck, with city maintenance at 7, corruption at 6, and global happiness at 4. And Imagine and I have voted for global happiness.
Hey, don't tell anybody that.
I can see it.
It's like half the votes.
Hey, it's about quality votes, not quantity.
Yeah, that's true.
Now, the Minion team has voted for city maintenance, and Kale has voted for corruption. Yeah, he did. So seeing as how we saw corruption in Civilization 1, Civilization 2, and Civilization 3, not that they were all the same, but they were variations on kind of the same approach towards, in part, this infinite city sprawl equals awesome for you. Now, I realize this is not an absolute, but this is kind of the more often than not. So trying to combat that. So, Kale, not to put you on the spot, but I'm going to do it anyway. Why did you vote for corruption?
And no problem being on the spot. I think about these things all the time. I like corruption because I feel like it does the best job of balancing big empires versus little. So if I can go out and affect, yes, you can have 10 cities, and here is the performance you're going to get out of your 10 cities as compared to your 4 cities. It gives me, as a game designer, it gives me a much better tool for managing that growth. And actually, I can scale things on a very even basis without having to individually tweak and balance on them. So it's a nice system for allowing the players to expand, that allow the players to have the empire they want to, and still being able to keep production in a bandwidth that I'm pacing for, rather than if I have 3 cities, then you have 3 times the production or 3 times the research or what have you there. I don't like city maintenance because I always feel like the point of cities is to build that economy up, and city maintenance seems the exact opposite of that, or it drives it down. You also have those death spiral issues where I like corruption because things may get to be less efficient, but you don't death spiral on it. And global happiness is kind of a harder limit for that growth, and it kind of constrains players in more specific ways, in my opinion.
follow-up question to what you've said there, Derek. Given that we've seen corruption in Civilization 1, 2, and 3, is there an implementation of corruption that we've seen in the Civ series so far that you prefer more than others, and perhaps that's the reason why you voted for corruption, or is it more or less equal across all three, or maybe two?
I have a corruption mechanic in Fallen Enchantress. It's called Unrest there, but it's very similar to corruption where you have the more cities you have, the more unrest you deal with, and there are ways to kind of mitigate that unrest and bring it down. So that's why, just speaking from a mechanic perspective, why I prefer the corruption mechanics as compared to the other two.
No, you don't. I've been playing Fallen Enchantress. There is no unrest per number of cities scaling, or at least it didn't make it to the game I play.
That is correct. It's not in the version that you were playing.
Yeah. The faction prestige, the growth of cities is definitely, the more cities you have, the less growth you have from your prestige, because it divides it across all of that.
One common global growth counter for everybody that's applied to all your cities. So the more cities you build, the slower they all grow. Yep,
unless you individually boost them.
Yep.
So I could see that. I don't quite mind the Forbidden Enchantress one, but then you have other limiters. And again, this is about the system around it, because in Fallen Enchantress you have other limiters, such as you can't just spam cities anywhere you feel like.
Yes.
Choices about where you put them, so you can't have like a map full of cities. So again, it's about systems. And that's why
exactly. It's really hard to judge these as base mechanics by themselves. What is the game designer trying to encourage? What is the gameplay that they're trying to push out?
Yeah. That's why I prefer global happiness over corruption, because I didn't like the distance factor corruption. It forced you to want to super pack everything, and that doesn't turn into a good game. That just turns into now we super pack and go from there, and there's no ability to just drop a city somewhere across the planet and make it a really big city. It's too far away, which isn't realistic at all. City maintenance, I kind of agree with you on that one. Cities should be growing. I mean, I do like a city maintenance requirement, and even in Civ 5, there's maintenance cost for buildings and stuff like that.
I like your example there, putting a city somewhere else. You say it's not realistic, which doesn't mean a whole lot to me, but it shouldn't be a goal of game design to make it realistic, but I do like that it's limiting a player's option. Hey, if I want to have that city that's over there, maybe there's an effect for it, but it should still be very viable, and depending on how that mechanics tweaks, sometimes it's just not, and I just don't feel like I have those tools available to me as a player anymore.
Yeah, and that's what the problem with corruption. But global happiness, you can actually make organic empires. There eventually is a hard cap on the number of cities you can drop, but that's fine. There is a balance between tall and wide in Civ 5. And again, with the system around it, the taller your cities are, there's a lot of buildings and other modifiers. Their percentile increases. Tall cities can get...
You're saying that it's unrealistic, that it's much more difficult to maintain a very distant city. But I'm not sure that's necessarily true, especially throughout most of history, where planning a city halfway across the world really wasn't, your empire really couldn't defend it and really couldn't communicate it with it effectively. I don't know that I agree with that. I think that element of having a empire is a worthy one in Civ, if you want to go from a realism standpoint. Gameplay perspective, I go half and half on a gameplay perspective. If you ignore realism entirely, is on the one hand, it's already very difficult to defend a very distant city. But, AI in every game has not been the bad about punishing people for doing that. So, I don't know.
Yeah, no, there is other limiters. If you drop a city halfway around the world and there's AIs around there, you might lose that city. and that's the movement mechanic of units and all that stuff. Or at least in Civ 5 and all the mechanics, you can choose to go a couple cities and go tall and be competitive with somebody who just goes ICS spam, where that's not really the case in Civ 4 or Civ 3. Just if you look at the mechanics on how the limitations trying to be applied.
In an update on the poll, who's listening to the show right now is Eamon, and he's logged in as a Ustream user. He has voted for global happiness, and Mackie figured out her password or reset it. She has also voted global happiness.
You, Mackie.
So corruption and global happiness are now trailing city maintenance by 1. That's 7 and tied to 6.
And I'm creating new Civ Fanatics accounts right now so I can vote
No stuffing the ballot box.
Okay, when I was voting on this, I rolled out corruption. And the reason I did that is you basically get the tremendous diminishing returns on cities, but only very late. So you had this core empire, which was pretty much the same for everybody. And the incentive was always to spam cities like crazy. So there really wasn't a lot of variety based on terrain or based on game situation or even play style preferences, really. If you wanted to do really well, you spammed cities. That's pretty much how it rolled. And I didn't like that. Now, that's not true for either global happiness or city maintenance. So when I'm picking between those two, they're actually not as different as they might seem at first glance. They're not. You can get into that downward death spiral in both games. It's a little bit less drastic in Civ 5, but if you put yourself into like 20, 30, 40, 50 unhappiness, you're probably not going to be in good shape. That'll probably ruin you pretty good if you're playing against anybody competent or on a difficulty level that's challenging.
Yeah, but it's a self-limiting mechanic.
But it's the same thing with maintenance.
You could lose those cities, and then you'll get your happiness back.
Well, I guess, but how many turns have you wasted? I mean, let's be fair. If you're playing on like a total crap difficulty compared to your ability, you can probably recover, sure. But if you're not, it's not going to be so easy. And and it would basically kill you in Civ 4, but you had to go overboard too. Like I said, if you knew what you were doing, you could get a lot of cities very quickly in Civ 4. And the reason I liked that mechanic, it was a very, very drastic thing, and you had to plan, okay, how quickly is the city going to become a net contributor to my empire instead of a drain on it? In your first couple of cities, it was immediately. So you'd want to settle your second and third city pretty quickly. But then you had to plan around terrain, too. And I don't think any of the other civs have captured the impact of the tiles themselves quite to the extent that Civ 4 has. And maybe that's part of the reason I went for maintenance over happiness. Maybe if you flipped it, I would have picked happiness, too. I don't know. The way maintenance surrounded the economic system in Civ 4 caused a very, very huge variety of how you could approach your economic game as well as how you could approach ICS. I mean, there were some games where you could get away with spamming cities without building a single cottage. And, there are some games where you just carpet the map in cottages or, you're relying on a wonder, for example.
I will say to your point, I did think a lot more about my economy in Civ 4 than I did in the other versions. I was constantly kind of keeping that gold total in mind and whether it was coming in and going out.
To that end, Zyman in the chat said, it's just easier to understand and manage for me. Because again, he also voted for happiness.
Different mechanics for different systems of the game. Some are better than others. I guess the question is, does it work within the rest of the system? So ignore whether or not you like happiness, ignore whether or not you like maintenance or corruption. Does it work? Did it do its job within its system?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think Civ 5's Global Happiness does a good job of balancing out small cities, incredibly small compared to former versions of Civ versus larger empires. So it accomplished its goal there. I think that the Civ 4, I was, like Madgen brought up earlier, we were thinking a lot more about the economic game in that game and keeping in mind on our gold values. So city maintenance accomplished its goal there. And corruption in Civ 3, I don't know. I built cities all over the place in Civ 3. That's just what that game was.
So I think the answer is corruption failed to complete its goal. Therefore, it's not the best trick.
For those people who are listening and you're deciding for yourself, even if you haven't played all Civilization titles, and if you haven't, shame on you.
Yeah, seriously.
Number 5 from episode 139.
I'm not the kind of guy that would take a woman out on a date and presume to order for her in a restaurant, so I'm not going to presume to know what your vote would be in this poll.
Oh, well, that's as close as you're going to get. So, well, we're
Whoa!
Just kidding.
Well, wait a minute.
That's as close you're going to get to dating her, Dan.
No. All right. You want to burn me? I'll burn you back. No, you see, I said I wanted to date a woman.
The age of this cast is just gone down by 10 or so. Maybe 15.
Yeah.
It's sad what I'm the one saying this, I'm afraid.
I can't half of what Lisa said, but oh god.
Number 4 from episode 141.
Cosplay Civ.
It's legendary, come on.
Yes, it is. Indeed, not only is the concept of girls playing Civ legendary, but so is this show, because again, we are 5 years old. The show is 5 years old. It's now in school, and it's throwing temper tantrums, and keeps asking why.
Why?
Yes, why?
Yeah, why did you bring us all back? Why?
Why? Why you make me get up so early?
Why are you mad?
Not as early as West Coast people, but
Why
dang.
are you jelly?
You jelly? Why are you mad?
Why you jelly at girls playing Civ, huh?
Number 3 from episode 149.
We should start with some segues here.
We should.
All right, Dad.
Yeah, it's all you, Dan. Provide us the segue.
Okay.
Let's go.
Okay, I know. Here we go. Everyone knows that your most important happiness resource is PolyCast, but what about your most important strategic resource?
Number 2 from episode 153.
Where's the 5th?
You're Canadian, that doesn't work.
No, I don't take a 5th here. I take a 2-4.
2x4? I'll use a 2x4.
No, not that 2-4.
Slightly different. But
depends how it's used.
Yeah.
You guys have these great segues, and then you just completely crash and burn.
Yay for editing.
That's part of our charm, Travis. Where have you been?
Editing is good.
So wait till later when we go through the possible uses of 2x4 in detail.
Number 1 from episode 140. The divergent correlation between score and success in a Civilization series through the lines of its 4th and 5th titles.
The formula for score in Civ 5. So, Silver Futurist posts in Civ Fanatics that, well, he thinks that the formula for score is broken. He posts a couple screenshots and he says there's 4-player Pangea, there's just 2 of us left, but I'm in 2nd even though I'm in 1st for every demographic. So he was just showing a multiplayer game in which, it seemed like he was going to be the winner, but, the score didn't accurately reflect that. Which led to, a nice discussion on what actually the score consists of. And it turns out that, score is mostly the heaviest, weighted, factor for score is how many wonders you have. So, the multiplier for wonders is actually 25. So for each wonder you get 25 extra points, as opposed to every tech you have, which only counts for 4 points. Same for each city, counts for 4 points. Each population counts for 4, and each future tech only provides you 10 points. So each wonder you build actually has a huge impact on whether you're ahead in score. But this might not even matter, depending on what kind of game you're playing. Which is exactly why this guy is saying, score is broken.
Oh, so in Civ 4, it was getting a bunch of population that broke the score, and in this game, it's getting all the wonders that breaks the score.
Pretty much.
Population was a better metric, though, because you could only have so much pop in any given city. And, usually your success is better tied to pop in Civ 4 than most other things. Now, there's some land quality issues to take into account there. But generally, the strength of your empire comes from your works tiles and your pop, either in the form of specialists or in the tile yields from the tiles. So it wasn't a bad component. It was maybe overweighted compared to, maybe land or tech or whatever else you want to go by. But at the end of the day, it's not a good predictor of who's ultimately going to win the game, but it's a fair predictor of whose position is the strongest at a given moment. Unless there's a huge tech disparity and that someone has a lower score could milk in the near future. But that's mostly a high-level thing where you're taking advantage of the AI's ineptitude to take away land from them. And that's why score is not a very good indicator in single player. It's not a perfect indicator in Civ 4 multiplayer, but you get a rough idea from it. And it's not perfect, but I don't want to go so far as to say it's broken in Civ 4. And I think Civ 5 just weights the wonders too heavily. It's just straight up weights it too much.
Yeah, I think the big problem is that it kind of creates this sort of thing where you have to metagame instead of just letting things grow naturally, because it puts so much pressure on trying to get wonders, even if you don't need them, because there's a lot of wonders in the game that just won't synergize with your strategy at all and are just a complete waste of time to build. But every one that you don't build gives someone else an opportunity to jump ahead in the score. And I think that's the big problem, is that there's just so much that you don't need, but now you're being pressured to want to try to build them just for end game score, which might not even end up being relevant. And that, I think, is what the big problem is.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that there's no, your score doesn't get better the earlier in the game. In Civ 4, in Civ 5, it's just, city population, land, wonders, tech, and future tech. So, taking all those together, I mean, yeah, they're okay indication, but, it leads one, just try to make the game, go as long as possible, right? If what you're trying to do is maximize score and you're under this weird assumption that it has something to do with, how likely you are to win. There's no incentive to end the game early, which is, what a skilled Civ player is supposed to do.
Yeah, to me, it's not about the variables that were chosen, it's the weighting of these things.
Was culture or social policies included in the score calculation for Civ 5?
No, they're not.
No.
Not at all?
No. I mean,
I think is definitely an oversight.
Yeah, and that's supposed to be,
Baseball.
sort of encompassed in tech, but the tech multiplier is only 4, which is, I think it should be a lot higher, especially when social policies aren't taken into account.
It's indirectly because that relates back to land area, but it's still, if they're not counting social policies or completed trees at all, and that's one of the victory conditions, I think that's kind of not very well thought out.
That's pretty crazy though. Like there's an inverse relationship between social policies and land. I don't know. Like you can't really tie them in that way. I think you need to score them separately. I mean, yeah, you can build enough things where you get pretty good culture and come with a huge empire, but that takes time. It can't be effectively weighted together.
I just meant in that both come directly from the culture generated from cities. So the amount of land that you have is usually correlated with the amount of social policies that you have because they both use the same fuel, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Sort of. It's not that strong. I guess it just doesn't correlate strongly enough.
Well, that's why I said indirect.
Yeah. But tech should definitely be more valuable. I don't know why they picked wonders to be the most valuable. I mean, they might as well have picked something really asinine, like bought tiles. How many tiles did you purchase? That gives you 100 points per tile you purchase. It's so random. Some of the wonders in the game are really, really good. And other wonders are just, they're not useless, but often not worth what you would give up to build them.
Yeah, and like I said before, even the ones that are really good still might not even have anything to do with your long-term strategy, so it is just a waste of time to build them.
Yeah, but you still get the points. I don't think the game could really accurately measure, is it worth your strategy or whatever, but I think it should definitely weight Wonders' score based on their actual value in terms of just how consistently they're worth something really big in gameplay. And yeah, I think Pop should be up there. I think tech has always been underrated as a score item in all the Civ games. And that's probably still the case in Civ 5, so maybe buff that up a bit too.
Well, I think that mostly just comes from the fact that tech is so useful for every other component of the game. The further along on the tech tree you are, the more wonders you're going to get, the better units you're going to have, so the more opportunities you're going to have to conquer cities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
So represent it in score. I mean, what is your score supposed to do? It's supposed to indicate how well you're doing.
Tech scoring overflows into other areas of the game because researching the text gives you the higher population and access to better infrastructure that's going to improve your economy and generate, all those things and give you wonders. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It should be weighted more, but it's sort of an overflow thing.
It's not accurately reflected because the things that give you an advantage from tech, such as the quality of your military, a lot of your city improvements, they don't get scored right away, whereas tech is. And tech gives you the option of doing a number of useful things very quickly once you reach a said tech. It really needs to be not trickling down the score, but represented immediately more strongly. I'm not saying it should be the only component of your score because it shouldn't be, but it should probably be around how strong wonders are right now. Maybe a little bit weaker than that, not much. It really needs to be the dominant component of score, in my opinion, if you actually want to reflect how well one civ is doing against another.
There's also the issue that depending on what type of victory condition you're going for, if it's not for domination in Civ 5 or conquest or domination in Civilization 4, especially culture, your score, is it really reflecting how well you are doing towards that particular victory condition? And the answer is no.
Well, not if social policies are involved and you're going for a culture victory.
Last place wins.
Score shouldn't be the be-all and end-all. It needs improvement, and yes, you should be comparing other measures as well, but comparative to how important some other information is, such as demographics, for example, which can also mislead, can also cause you to get to make some assumptions and make some decisions based on those assumptions that are not in your best interests. Just looking at score alone, I also started to think about, and this really didn't come up either in the Civ 4 or the Civ 5 thread, but it's almost in which Civ game is score, I don't want to phrase it as better, but it's almost like, so in which game is score a worse reflection of your performance in the game? And I feel like I can't directly answer that, only because having played Civilization 4 more, I've tried towards different victory conditions more often as compared to Civ 5, where it's been almost, strictly domination. But in Civilization 4, man, it's bad enough. Looks like it's just as bad, if not worse, in Civilization 5, and that is unfortunate, especially for newer players. Score, as a first measure, you can either be really encouraged or really discouraged, and then you either get a nasty or a pleasant surprise, and it's often you get a nasty surprise. What is also interesting is in looking at the global defined XML between Civilization 5 and Civilization 4, in addition to the multipliers that are measured there, it's interesting when it comes to maximums. Your score, if you have the maximum population possible on the current map, score if you have all of the land on the current map, if you get all of the wonders, if you get all of the text, percentage your score that gets added if you win the game, the amount of score modifier per handicap level, those values are the same between Civilization 4 and Civilization 5. Every single one.
That might have just been a carryover where they just copy-pasted the same file and didn't think to change it.
Yes, and it's that not thinking to change it that gives pause.
And number 1 from episode 162.
Best Civ intro.
Whoa, whoa, stop. That's favorite Civ intro, not necessarily best. I'm just, I'm being nitpicky.
Nope, best. Because it's my favorite, which means it's the best.
But it might not necessarily be the favorite of everybody, so therefore it wouldn't be their best. So it's their favorite.
That's relevant, Dan. I don't know why you're bringing that up. It doesn't-er.
Did you say it doesn't-er? Or did you just cut out badly and it sounded like you said a word that doesn't?
It doesn't matter.
Oh.
Okay, that doesn't-er. It doesn't-er. I like that word.
It doesn't-er.
I think I just made a new word.
Call in today. In North America, the number is 301-637-7659.
That's 301-637-POLY.
In Europe, 44121-288-7659. That's 44121-288-POLY.
The only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about.
For more information on PolyCast,
our sibling shows Modcast, Revcast, and Turncast,
or about PolyCast in general,
log on to the series' official website at thepolycast.net.
Thank you for listening to PolyCast Evergreen Season 6. I'm Wouter, Locutus Snijders. I am the beginning, the end, the one who is many.
Civilization 1 clips, copyright Microprose.
Civilization 4 sound clips, copyright Take-Two Interactive. Copyright Civilized Communication at civcom.net.